My name's John Gillespie and I'm an Inspector of Railways. I run a number of teams whose job it is to look after the safety of the travelling public by inspecting the way in which rail companies are running their businesses and making sure that they're keeping passengers safe. One of the main health risks for my workforce is from work-related stress. Now, all this research shows that work is good for you. Work pressure is good for you. In fact, work pressure will never go away. When we talk about work-related stress, what we're actually talking about is making sure that those pressures never get to the point where they're causing ill health symptoms. In other words, we don't want things to tip over into ill health. I lead 5 teams of 30 people out of about 250 who work for ORR as a whole. Some of my people travel to Europe to be involved in negotiations with our European colleagues. Others are involved in inspecting the railway directly, looking at human factors issues or railway operations, and others are office-based. Work-related stress, why should we bother about it? Why am I bothered about it? The reason is that I do not want to lose any of my staff to long-term sick. That would have negative effects on the productivity of my teams for a start, but as well as the ill health that they would suffer, which is not something I want on my conscience, to be honest. We based our approach on the HSE stress management standards, which are available on their website. These standards set out practical benchmarks for areas of managing your people that you need to get right in order to avoid positive work pressure tipping over into stress-related ill health. The 6 areas that they cover are the demands on people from their workload, control, the degree of control they have over that workload, the support that they have from their colleagues, the relationships with their colleagues, the role that they perform, do they understand it, and change management. And all these 6 areas together, if we get them right, give us a good practical way of controlling work-related stress. So how did we go about it? Well, I was in the privileged position that I'm already a senior manager in ORR, so I was able to say to my team managers, I want to explore stress amongst our workforce, and I want to use the standards in order to help us do that. In your organisation, you may need to get senior management commitment to doing that in the first place. All I did was I asked my team managers to come to their routine management meeting. Sent out the link to the stress management standards in advance and said, this is what I want to have a discussion about. Please talk with your people and come prepared to have a discussion based on what they think and what you think against the 6 areas. And on the basis of that discussion, we'll decide what we as a management team can do and what ORR as a wider organisation can do to actually deal with those 6 areas better. And what we do against each of the 6 is say, this is what's expected and where are we and how can we improve. So for instance, on control, the standard is quite straightforward. It says, to what extent do people have a say in the way they do their job? And are there any systems in place to be able to respond to their concerns? Well, I ask my managers, where are we on that? Do we think we're doing that well? Are there any areas to improve? Okay, so we have the discussion, and what I want to see as chair is people being open and honest. If we're not getting it right, say we're not getting it right. Even say if we think it's impossible to do anything about, because every business has to put up with expected to do more with less resource. But let's get it out in the open and talk about it. There may be something that we can do. I then, as chair, summarise the discussion, bring it down into a note against each of the 6 standards. Just setting out what's positive, because there's often a lot of positive that comes out from this kind of discussion. Then, where are the areas where we think we can improve? And then, perhaps, a note of who should take that forward. After I've written up the note, I then circulate that to the managers, make sure that they're happy with it, and then ask them to cascade it to their staff and seek any feedback that those staff wish to give. The whole purpose of writing the note is not to create a grand plan for tick box, we must do this and then we've done stress. Rather, it's to explore the areas that you have to get right day in, day out, and make sure that you're continuing to manage the positive things and paying attention to the issues where you need to improve. From my point of view, what I want to see from my managers is that they're paying attention to managing each of the 6 areas in the management standards day in, day out. I don't particularly want to see particular action points being delivered, because this is so much about day-to-day management of people and being aware of the things that you have to get right in order to achieve good management of the stress and work pressures that people are under. So I then take any feedback that I hear from staff and we feed that into another discussion, perhaps at a later managers meeting. So is it working? Is it worthwhile? Should we bother? I think in these particularly tough times that we've got, people are under financial pressures, pressures at home, pressures at work, every business is having generally to make cutbacks. Do these standards actually help? I believe that they do. And the reason I believe they do is because they help us to actually discuss those areas. We don't hide them. We actually bring them out, talk about them, and we might not be able to solve them all completely, but we have and are able to identify the things that we can do to make things better. And that's what it's about, trying to get improvement. What I want to emphasise to my team managers is that managing health is a long-term matter. Even though we bring out the stress risk assessment every year, tends to be in January when it's in my diary to do so, what I want to see is that during the year they are paying attention to that. So we may come back at our routine team managers meetings and say, how are we doing on that? And it's my job to be curious about how well we're doing on that. For us, looking at the stress management standards has helped us to get the right atmosphere that encourages people to do their work and do their work well. You might be wondering, particularly if you're working in a rail industry organisation, well, what can I do? The answer is, you can be aware that these standards exist. Just reading them for yourself will indicate the kinds of areas that you might be able to have an influence over, either in the position you're in or by talking to your colleagues in the management chain. What I would say is, this is something that everyone can work with. It's a practical benchmark, and the way that we've approached it, of managers discussing, there's other ways that these standards could be used. But the key is to know they exist, to know and have the foresight to talk about these areas before you get the first or more of your staff off on long-term sick leave, citing stress as the reason. Better to be proactive.
Stress management could be very complex, but what we're trying to say here is that at an awareness level, there are tools and approaches that are available that are straightforward to use, and there are examples across this industry where they have been used. It's important to recognise that managers and supervisors play a pivotal role in preventing stress. Straightforward tools and approaches like the HSE stress standards are available, and it's worth exploring these and seeing whether you can use them in your workplace.